Samuel Carter had always believed that the land would outlive him. His family had owned the ranch for more than 100 years. His great-grandfather had cleared the first fields with his own hands. His grandfather had built the barns, and his father had expanded the grazing areas. Each generation added something of value. For Samuel, the ranch was not just soil and fences. It was the place where every memory of his life was stored. It was where he had learned to walk, where he had learned to ride a horse, and where he had learned to love. When his wife passed away, the ranch felt strangely silent. She had been the one who kept things warm and organized. She made sure that meals were cooked on time, guests were welcomed with kindness, and every corner of the house smelled like home. Without her, Samuel moved through the rooms as if he were drifting through someone else's life. He tried to keep working, but grief made everything heavier. Even simple tasks like feeding the horses or fixing a broken gate felt like climbing a hill with a weight on his back. Months passed, and he pushed himself to manage the ranch alone. But new state rules were introduced that made things complicated. The land needed to be listed under a stable partnership, someone who lived on the ranch and could share legal responsibility. It was meant to protect the land from misuse, but for Samuel, it created a problem he never expected. He could not keep the ranch in his name alone. Without a registered partner or spouse, the authorities would put the ranch up for auction by the end of the season. Samuel met with officials, hoping for some exception, but the answer never changed. The rules were clear. He needed someone to stand with him legally, someone who lived on the ranch full-time. He drove home after every meeting with a tighter feeling in his chest. Losing his wife had already broken him once. He wasn't sure he could survive losing the ranch, too. He began asking people he knew. His late wife's cousin lived in another town, but she had her own family to care for and could not move to his land. His neighbors had their own farms and responsibilities. Some wanted to help, but had no way to relocate. Others quietly avoided the topic because they understood that such a partnership came with weight and responsibility. Days stretched into weeks, and pressure built around him like a storm gathering in the distance. The ranch was large and old. It needed someone who understood its rhythm. Not just anyone could take on that responsibility. Samuel couldn't trust a stranger either. What if they didn't respect the land? What if they saw it only as a business and not as a home? There was only one constant presence on the ranch, Maria, the housekeeper. She had been working there for 5 years. On the official paperwork, she was listed under a simple label from the employment lists, Lot 18. It sounded cold and distant, but it was just a number assigned during the ranch's hiring season years ago. Samuel never thought much about it, and neither did she. Maria was quiet and gentle, the kind of person who completed her work without drawing attention. She preferred silence over unnecessary conversations. Every morning she woke before sunrise, swept the porch, fed the chickens, and prepared breakfast for Samuel without being asked. She moved through the house with careful steps, respecting the space and maintaining the routines his wife once followed. She never asked for anything extra. Her presence brought a sense of balance to the home, even though she rarely spoke about herself. Samuel appreciated her steady work, but had never considered her beyond her duties. She kept the place running, but he didn't imagine involving her in anything beyond that. Still, she was the only person who truly knew the ranch from the inside. She knew where everything belonged, which corner of the kitchen roof leaked when it rained, and which horse required special feeding. She had stayed through storms, through long winters, and through the silence after his wife's passing. One evening, Samuel sat on the old wooden chair on the porch, staring at the sunset stretching across the fields. He felt tired, not from the day's work, but from the weight of decisions waiting for him. The deadline for naming a partner was approaching. If he did nothing, everything his family built for generations would slip away. Maria came out quietly to place a cup of warm tea beside him, like she always did. She didn't ask him what was wrong. She simply understood that he needed a moment. Her simple kindness made him realize something important. She was the only person who had stayed no matter how difficult things became. He watched her walk back inside and wondered if the answer had been right in front of him all along. But how could he ask her such a thing? It wasn't a small request. It was asking her to legally join him as a partner, not romantically, not emotionally, but in a way that carried responsibility. She might think he was using her, she might feel uncomfortable or pressured. He did not want that. She had already given so much to the ranch without expecting anything in return. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He lay awake thinking of his father's words from long ago. A ranch needs two types of people, those who work with the land and those who stand by each other. He never thought he would one day be without someone to stand by him. The next morning, he finally gathered courage. He found Maria in the kitchen preparing breakfast. She looked up with her usual gentle expression, unaware of the heavy conversation about to begin. He asked her to sit, something he had never done before. She hesitated but quietly took a seat. Samuel explained everything, about the rules, about the threat of losing the land, about how he had no one left to ask. His voice was steady, but he could feel his hands trembling under the table. He made sure she understood that the arrangement would be legal only, nothing personal or emotional. She would share responsibility and help protect the ranch. Maria listened with calm eyes, though her hands tightened around the edge of her apron. She had never imagined being asked something so serious. When he finished, she sat silent for a long moment. The ticking clock on the wall became the only sound in the room. She finally told him she needed time to think. Samuel nodded, respecting her space. He didn't want her to feel forced. For the next few days, Samuel tried to continue his routine. But everything felt uncertain. He didn't want to lose the ranch, but he also didn't want to place an unfair burden on Maria. She was hard-working and loyal, but she had her own past, her own quiet wounds that she never spoke about. Maria also spent those days deep in thought. The ranch was the only place where she had ever felt safe. She knew the land better than anyone except Samuel. She also knew how much it meant to him. The decision weighed on her heart, not because she feared responsibility, but because she understood the trust he was placing in her. Finally, one evening, she approached him on the porch. Her voice was soft but steady. She told him she would stand with him. She agreed, not for money, not for recognition, but because the ranch had become her home too, and she did not want to see it lost. Samuel felt the tension in his chest loosen for the first time in months. Her agreement wasn't just an answer. It was hope. The partnership would change both of their lives in ways they hadn't expected, but neither of them realized then how deeply this choice would shape their future. Maria had always been the kind of person who moved quietly through the world. She never tried to stand out, never tried to draw attention. Life had taught her early that silence was safer than noise, and steady work was better than unpredictable change. Before she came to Samuel's ranch, she had lived in several places, but none of them ever felt like home. Her past was filled with uncertainty, shifting from one job to another, carrying her few belongings in an old cloth bag that had grown worn with time. When she first arrived at the Carter Ranch 5 years earlier, she had been unsure if she would last even a week. The place was large and full of responsibilities, and Samuel's wife, Emily, had high expectations. But Emily was also kind. She taught Maria how to manage the kitchen, how to care for the linens, and how to maintain the warmth of a home. Maria remembered those early days clearly, the smell of fresh bread in the oven, the sound of laughter in the dining room, and the peaceful evenings when the family gathered on the porch. After Emily passed away, the house lost that warmth, but it did not lose the sense of safety. Maria stayed because the ranch felt like the only stable ground she had ever walked on. Working from sunrise to sunset kept her mind calm. The open fields made her feel free in a quiet, gentle way. She did not have many dreams. But she wanted a place where she could breathe without fear. The ranch gave her that. So when Samuel asked her to consider becoming his legal partner to save the land, her heart filled with both fear and confusion. She respected him deeply. He had always treated her with fairness, never raising his voice, never rushing her work, and never making her feel lesser than anyone else. But what he was asking now felt completely different from anything she expected. She spent the first night lying awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. The thin curtain let in the moonlight, and she watched the shadows move gently across the walls. It was not an easy decision. She understood the seriousness of the arrangement. It wasn't about becoming a couple. Samuel had made that very clear. It was a legal partnership, something that would tie her to him on paper, something that would bind their names together in a way that didn't involve feelings, but carried weight. For Maria, the problem wasn't the responsibility itself. She had always been responsible. It was the fear of stepping into something that might change the balance of her life. She worried that people in the town would talk, that they would misunderstand, that they would think she had pushed herself into Samuel's life for personal gain. She feared judgment, not because she cared about gossip, but because she didn't want to bring any trouble to the ranch or to Samuel. The next morning, she worked in silence, as she always did, but her thoughts were loud. She swept the hallways, washed the dishes, and fed the chickens, yet every task carried the weight of the decision she had to make. Samuel tried not to disturb her. He understood she needed time, and he respected her space. He watched her from afar, quietly hoping but not expecting anything. As she hung freshly washed clothes on the line behind the house, she looked at the wide fields stretching far into the distance. The ranch had become more than just a job. It had become a place she depended on. It had offered her kindness when she had nothing, and she wanted to repay that kindness. She did not want to see the land taken away. She had heard stories of auctions, strangers buying old properties, dividing them, and changing everything. She could not imagine this ranch losing its identity. She remembered small moments she had seen over the years. Samuel patting an old horse with affection, Emily planting wildflowers near the barn, the family gathering for meals, children running during holiday seasons. Even after Emily's passing, Maria kept those memories alive in her work. She preserved the routines Emily had created, hoping to honor her memory. The thought of the ranch disappearing felt like losing those memories all over again. By the second evening, she felt a growing sense of responsibility, but she also felt a sense of fear. She had never made a decision that affected someone else's life so deeply. She had only been responsible for her own work and her own survival. Now Samuel was offering her a place in something much bigger. On the third morning, she found Samuel sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the horizon. He looked tired, not physically, but emotionally. The ranch was everything to him, and she could see that fear in his eyes. It wasn't the fear of losing land. It was the fear of losing a legacy, losing a piece of his family. Without saying anything, she brought him a fresh cup of tea. When he thanked her quietly, she simply nodded. She stood a moment, wondering how to speak the words that were crowding her heart. Samuel looked up, sensing she had something to say, but he didn't pressure her. "Sir," she finally whispered, her voice soft. May I think a little more?" Samuel nodded immediately. "Take all the time you need, Maria. I don't want you to feel pressured. I want you to be comfortable with whatever choice you make." His calm reaction lifted some of her worry. She had expected him to feel anxious, maybe even desperate, but instead, he showed patience and respect. That showed her something important. He did not want her to suffer because of this decision. He only wanted honesty. As the day passed, Maria's heart began to settle. She realized that her fear came from uncertainty, not from the idea itself. If she agreed, she would not be losing anything. In fact, she might be gaining the chance to finally belong somewhere. She had spent years drifting, and this ranch had been the first place where she felt stable. The idea of helping save it felt like the right thing to do. That evening, after finishing her chores, she walked slowly to the porch. Samuel was standing by the railing, watching the sky change colors as the sun set behind the hills. She approached him quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. He turned when he heard her footsteps. His eyes searched her face gently, waiting. "I have decided," she said softly. Samuel held his breath without realizing. "I will help you," she continued. "I will stand with you. The ranch should not be lost. If I can help save it, then I want to." The relief on Samuel's face was visible. It was as if a heavy burden had lifted from his shoulders. His voice came out warm and sincere when he thanked her. He didn't hide his gratitude. He didn't try to act strong. He simply appreciated her decision with genuine relief. In that moment, something changed silently between them. They were no longer just employer and employee. They became partners in a shared responsibility, bound not by emotion but by loyalty and respect. The next day, Samuel began explaining the legal steps. Maria listened quietly, absorbing everything with focus. She asked simple questions when she needed clarity, and Samuel answered patiently. They visited town to sign initial documents, and although some people looked at them with curiosity, they ignored it. They had nothing to explain to anyone. Maria felt nervous walking into the office where the paperwork was handled. She wasn't used to being involved in decisions like this. But when she signed her name, she felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just a housekeeper anymore. She was someone trusted, someone who mattered to the future of the ranch. After the signing, Samuel drove her back home, and they sat for a moment in silence. The decision was now real. Maria looked at the vast fields and felt a mix of fear and peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She had chosen the path that felt right. And Samuel, sitting beside her, quietly realized that her choice meant more than she knew. It was the beginning of a partnership built on trust, loyalty, and shared purpose. Neither of them knew how deeply their lives were about to change, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. Life on the ranch slowly began to change after Maria agreed to become Samuel's legal partner. Nothing shifted overnight, but small differences appeared in their routines, their conversations, and the way they worked together. For the first time, Maria was not just someone who cleaned the house. She was someone who shared responsibility for the land. Samuel treated her gently, never rushing her, and never making her feel pressured, but he included her in decisions he once handled alone. The first few days were slightly awkward for both of them. Samuel tried to explain financial records, grazing schedules, and land inspections. Maria listened carefully, taking silent notes in a small notebook she kept tucked in her apron pocket. Even though she had never managed a ranch before, she absorbed information quickly. She was used to working hard, and learning new things didn't scare her. One morning, Samuel walked her through the barns, showing her the condition of each horse, each stall, and each storage room. Maria followed quietly, sometimes stopping to touch the wooden walls or check the condition of tools. She noticed things Samuel had overlooked: the loose hinge on the feed room door, the water bucket that had a slow leak, and the broom with missing bristles. She did not say much, but Samuel watched the way her eyes caught details and felt grateful. A day later, she repaired the hinge herself. The next morning, she replaced the old broom with a new one she found in the storage shed. She even patched the leaking water bucket. Her careful attention reminded Samuel of how Emily used to notice small things that he never saw. But Maria didn't replace his late wife. She simply brought her own quiet style of care to the ranch. As days turned into weeks, they settled into a natural rhythm. Samuel woke early to check the fences and feed the horses. Maria prepared breakfast and joined him outside afterward, helping with whatever tasks she could. He taught her how to safely carry hay bales, how to check for weak fence posts, and how to keep track of which cattle needed special care. She was quieter than most people, but she learned quickly and never complained. Sometimes Samuel found himself surprised. He had assumed certain tasks would be too heavy or too tiring for her, but Maria approached everything with steady determination. When she struggled, she didn't give up. She simply tried again until she managed it. She never asked for praise, yet her efforts earned Samuel's respect more than she realized. One afternoon, while repairing the south fence line, Samuel accidentally dropped a heavy wooden post on his foot. He winced in pain and tried to continue working, but Maria immediately stepped forward, urging him to sit. Without any hesitation, she took over the hammering, her movements precise and strong. Samuel watched her with a mixture of admiration and gratitude, realizing how dependable she had become. As they worked more closely, they talked a little more, not a lot, but enough to create comfort between them. Samuel shared stories of the ranch's history, and Maria listened with interest, absorbing each detail. Sometimes she shared small pieces of her own past, nothing too personal, but enough to show trust. She spoke about the different towns she had lived in, the jobs she had held, and the hope she had carried quietly for a stable life. Their bond grew not through deep conversations, but through shared labor and mutual respect. They learned to communicate without many words. A glance was enough to understand when the other needed help. A small nod became a sign of agreement. A simple meal shared after a long day felt like companionship. But not everyone in the nearby town understood their partnership. When Samuel drove to town with Maria sitting beside him, people noticed. Some looked with curiosity, some with confusion, and some with judgment. They whispered in corners of the market, wondering what had changed on the Carter Ranch. Samuel heard some of the whispers, but he didn't let them bother him. He knew the truth, and that was enough for him. But Maria felt uneasy. She had never liked attention, and she worried that the townspeople might misunderstand. She didn't want Samuel to face any trouble because of her. One day, as they walked through the general store picking up supplies, a few women exchanged glances and spoke in low voices. Maria felt her stomach tighten with discomfort. She kept her eyes lowered and moved closer to Samuel, hoping to stay unnoticed. Samuel noticed her uneasiness. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and reassured her with a quiet, steady tone. "Let them talk," he said softly. "We know why we're here." That's what matters. His simple reassurance meant more to her than he knew. It made her feel protected, respected, and valued, things she had rarely felt in her life before the ranch. As the season progressed, more challenges appeared on the land. A dry spell caused water shortages in some grazing areas. The cattle became restless, and finding good grass became difficult. Samuel and Maria spent long hours working under the sun, moving water barrels, checking ground moisture, and guiding the herd to safer areas. During those long days, Maria proved again how strong her spirit was. She walked through fields under the blazing heat without complaint. She carried heavy buckets with determination. When Samuel felt discouraged by the dry conditions, Maria quietly reminded him that the land had survived worse in the past. Her calmness grounded him. One night, a storm approached. Dark clouds rolled over the hills, and strong winds shook the windows. Samuel rushed outside to secure the barns, and Maria followed without hesitation, even though the wind made it difficult to walk. Together they tied down loose objects, closed barn doors tightly, and checked on each animal. The storm hit hard, with loud thunder and flashing lightning, but they worked side by side until everything was secure. Afterward, soaked from the rain and exhausted, they returned to the house. Samuel prepared warm drinks for both of them, insisting she rest. They sat quietly, listening to the storm outside. In that peaceful silence, something shifted inside both of them. They realized how much they depended on each other, not out of necessity, but out of trust. The next morning, the storm had caused damage. Part of the barn roof had been torn, and a large tree branch blocked the main path. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, they approached the problems like a team. Maria collected fallen debris, while Samuel repaired the roof. They worked for hours without pause, and by the afternoon, the ranch looked stable again. The more they worked together, the stronger their partnership became. Even the cattle seemed calmer when both of them were around. The ranch had once been a place of loneliness for Samuel, but now it felt alive again. And for Maria, the ranch was becoming more than a place of safety. It was becoming a place where she belonged. As the deadline approached for the official land inspection, Samuel and Maria prepared everything with care. They organized financial records, cleaned the barns, repaired fences, and ensured all equipment was in good condition. Samuel kept reminding Maria that she didn't need to worry, but she worked harder than ever, wanting to support him fully. On the morning of the inspection, Maria stood beside Samuel as officials walked through the ranch. She felt nervous, but Samuel's calm presence helped her stay steady. The inspectors reviewed everything carefully. They asked questions, checked paperwork, and examined the land. Maria answered a few questions gently, explaining details about her daily work. Samuel observed the way the inspectors nodded with approval, impressed by her knowledge and contribution. By the time the inspection ended, Samuel could tell from their expressions that the ranch was going to pass. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. When the officials finally confirmed it, he turned to Maria with a grateful smile that reached his eyes. She returned a small, shy smile, feeling a quiet sense of pride. They had done it together. The season that had started with uncertainty now ended with stability and hope. Their partnership, unexpected, simple, and built on trust, had saved the ranch. Without realizing it, they had formed a bond stronger than either of them had imagined when this journey began. The ranch passed the inspection, but life did not suddenly become simple. The land still needed care, bills still needed paying, and the future still held unknown challenges. Yet something had changed deeply between Samuel and Maria. They were no longer strangers working under the same roof. They were partners who had survived storms, literal and emotional, together. Their bond had developed quietly, through small actions and shared responsibilities, without either of them ever speaking about it directly. For Samuel, the ranch no longer felt like a place that reminded him only of loss. Before, every corner of the house carried the memory of his late wife, and every field reminded him of the life he once had. But now, instead of grief filling the spaces, new strength had taken root. Maria's presence was gentle, steady, and respectful of the past. She never tried to replace anyone, nor did she ever act as if she deserved a place she had not earned. She simply cared for the ranch with sincerity, and over time, the weight that had once pressed on Samuel's heart began to lift. Maria, on the other hand, felt like she was slowly discovering a version of herself she never knew existed. For the first time, she was valued. Not just for her work, but for her loyalty, her patience, and her thoughtfulness. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just someone cleaning rooms. She was someone who mattered, someone who made a real difference, someone who helped save a legacy that meant everything to a man who had lost almost everything. Even though their partnership wasn't built on romance, there was a deep sense of respect and warmth between them. They didn't need to explain it. It existed in the way they spoke to each other, worked together, and trusted one another. One early morning, months after the inspection, Samuel stood at the edge of the fields watching the sunrise. The sky glowed with shades of gold and pink, casting long shadows over the ranch. He had always loved quiet mornings, but this one felt different. He heard footsteps behind him, steady and familiar. It was Maria, carrying a warm cup of tea like she often did. She handed him the cup with her usual calm expression, but Samuel noticed something new in her eyes. She looked peaceful, content, almost at ease in a way he rarely saw. He wondered if she finally felt like this ranch was her home, too. "You're up early," he said gently. "I heard the wind," she replied softly. "I thought the night might bring a storm." He nodded. She always paid attention to the weather, the animals, and the land. It had become natural for her. As they stood together watching the sun rise, Samuel felt a quiet thought forming inside him, something he hadn't allowed himself to imagine before. He wondered if their partnership, which had started from necessity, could become something deeper. But he pushed the thought aside, unsure if Maria would ever want that, or if it was even fair to think about it. Maria, too, sometimes wondered about the future. She often found herself thinking of Samuel during quiet moments, how patient he was, how respectfully he spoke, and how he always protected her dignity. She had never met someone who valued her without expecting anything in return, but Maria was careful with her thoughts. She didn't want to confuse her gratitude with emotions she wasn't ready to understand. One afternoon, while preparing lunch, Maria found an old wooden box inside a cabinet. She carried it to Samuel, unsure if she should open it. When he saw the box, his expression softened. It belonged to Emily. Inside were old photographs, handwritten notes, and small items that held memories from their shared life. Samuel sat down slowly and opened the box. He didn't cry. He simply held the memories in his hands with gentle respect. Maria felt unsure whether she should leave the room and give him privacy, but Samuel quietly placed the box on the table and shook his head softly. "It's all right," he said. "You've earned the right to know what this ranch meant to my family." He showed her old pictures, the house before renovations, Emily standing in the fields, holidays celebrated on the porch, and the laughter frozen in time. Maria listened quietly, learning more about the woman who had once brought joy to this place. She never felt jealous or out of place. Instead, she felt honored that Samuel trusted her enough to share something so personal. When he finished, he carefully put everything back in the box. "Thank you," he said softly. Maria didn't speak, but her gentle nod told him she understood the weight of the moment. Their bond deepened after that day. Samuel found himself wanting to share more of the ranch's history with her, while Maria began feeling comfortable enough to talk a little more about her own life. She never shared everything. There were parts of her past that still felt too heavy, but she revealed enough for Samuel to understand her strength. Seasons changed, bringing new work and new challenges. During spring, the cattle needed extra care, and the fields required planting. Maria learned how to manage feed schedules, how to assist with the cattle, and how to watch for signs of illness. Samuel was amazed by how quickly she adapted. She had a natural sense for the land, something he had never expected. One warm afternoon, while mending the fence near the southern part of the ranch, Samuel looked at Maria as she worked beside him. She was tying new wire with calm focus, her hands steady and sure. He appreciated her presence more than words could express. She didn't just work. She cared. She cared for the land almost as much as he did. "Maria," he said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. She looked up, waiting. "You've changed this place," he said, "and you've changed me too." She blinked, unsure how to respond. Compliments made her uncomfortable. She never believed she deserved praise. "I only did what needed to be done," she said softly. Samuel smiled gently. "It was much more than that. Before she could reply, a strong gust of wind blew across the field, reminding them that weather was shifting. They returned to work, but the words stayed with her. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about them. As more time passed, their daily routines became smoother. They ate meals together, shared quiet conversations, and planned the future of the ranch side by side. People in town eventually stopped talking. They saw the ranch thriving again. They saw the respect between the two. Their curiosity faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. One evening, after finishing all the work for the day, Samuel sat on the porch with Maria as the sky darkened. The stars began to appear one by one. The air was cool and gentle. The ranch seemed peaceful, almost glowing under the moonlight. Samuel turned to her and spoke softly. "You know, when I first asked you for help, I thought I was asking too much." Maria looked down at her hands. "It was a big decision." "Yes," he said, "but you saved this place. I don't think I could have done it without you." Maria felt warmth in her chest at his words. She didn't think of herself as someone who could save anything. But Samuel's trust had shown her she was stronger than she ever believed. "You trusted me," she said quietly. That made all the difference. Samuel nodded, his expression gentle. Trust grows where respect lives. Maria looked out at the fields. The land stretched far under the moonlight, peaceful and safe. She realized that this ranch had become more than a place she worked. It had become the first home she ever felt truly connected to. Their partnership, born out of necessity, had turned into something deeper, something built on understanding, effort, and quiet care. Neither of them tried to give it a name. They simply let it grow, one day at a time. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became meaningful. The ranch prospered again. The animals stayed healthy. The fields grew strong. And inside the house, the once empty rooms filled with a warm and peaceful calm. Their days blended gently into months, and their months into a life shaped by steady hands, shared burdens, and silent gratitude. Samuel and Maria's bond wasn't a dramatic love story or a sudden, loud change. It was a quiet story. Two people finding strength in each other when life had given them very little. It was about respect growing into trust, trust growing into companionship, and companionship growing into something unspoken but deeply real. Together, they protected the land. Together, they rebuilt a life. And in that quiet partnership, built slowly and honestly, they found something rare: peace, belonging, and a shared future shaped not by chance, but by choice.